Typically, every single video that I do on the channel requires a script, in order for me to do all of the documents and to make sure that every concept is okay. But this video, no script. Okay, there is no script in this video. This is just a small tier list of languages that many people have done on YouTube. But in this case, I'm doing a very small tier list. Okay, not a lot of things are going to be happening in this tier list. So yeah, let's just get straight into it. Right here on this website, you can just see the flags of the languages that I'm going to be ranking in this small tier list. We have Russian, Hebrew. I'm using the Israeli flag. Please do not comment anything about Israel. I know that the conflict that's happening there is very bad. Just please do not comment anything regarding the matter happening in Israel. But anyway, Hebrew is obviously spoken in Israel, so it chose this flag. We have Russian, Hebrew, English, because we're America, right? English is spoken in the States, but it's also spoken in different spots of the world. I just decided to go with the American flag because it's America. Then we have, the Mexican flag. This is Spanish, German, French, and Italian, basically. So basically the way that this tier list is going to work is that we have an S tier, A tier, B tier, C, and D. And again, many people have done this type of tier list on the internet, on YouTube, but I only have seven flags and 7 languages, and I'm just going to be judging them based on what I consider it to be the easiest, from the easiest practically, and then to the most difficult one that not a lot of speakers basically speak in the whole world regarding these languages, right? So again, not a lot of flags, not a lot of languages. It's basically a small tier list of languages, obviously. So yeah, right off the bat, we have the S tier, which I would consider as like the easiest language will go there. It's a language that many people should learn. It's a very easy language. It's a very practical one. Might be some difficulties in between, but S tier is just the God tier. It's the divine tier. Then we have the A tier. Basically, it's close to the S tier, indicating that this language might have some difficulties, but overall it's very easy, but not quite touching S tier. Then we have the B tier, which I would consider kind of like a basic language. Basic language, not too hard, not too easy too. At the same time, maybe including phonetics, grammar, lexicon, which is how I'm going to be judging all of these languages: sound, grammar, and also vocabulary, depending on how hard the languages are. And then also we have the C tier, which is like hard languages will go there as a spoiler. And those languages, they're probably more difficult grammatically, but maybe the sounds might be easy, but there are a lot of elements to learn from those languages. Just saying. Then we have the D tier, only one language will go there, spoiler, because there's just not a lot of practice with this language. Because not a lot of people speak it and it's very hard to learn. Also, the way that I'm approaching this tier list, just from my perspective, is like, imagine a person that has never learned these languages, never heard of these languages, and you have to be in their shoes. You basically have to have their perspective. That's how I'm going to be basically ranking this, small tier list of languages. So anywho, some languages here I'm a native speaker of, some languages here I taught myself and then also made videos about, and one language, which is Spanish, spoiler, I learned in a university. So again, there's basically different levels of criticism, I guess you can say, with these languages. But anyway, I'm going to be getting the tier, based from the languages I know the most to the least. Starting with Russian. Russian is obviously spoken in Russia, analyzing again the phonetics, which is the sound, the grammar, and the vocab that this language has. I would say, coming from the perspective, again, from someone who would not know the language, even though I'm a native speaker of the language, I would say that this is probably, aside maybe from Hebrew, probably the most difficult language in this tier because of the Russian cases. Again, the phonetics and the sounds of this language, not too difficult. Most words that are let's say spelled with an O are pronounced with an A, so we can basically get used to it. But again, aside from Hebrew, the most difficult grammar, I would say, out of all of these languages. And if I just go incognito mode for a second like this, and I put Russian cases endings, let me just show this on the screen just like so. Regarding German, you do have cases in German, but only articles are affected by cases. But in this case, we have the 6 Russian cases. You have to learn the endings of Russian words, and I, as a native speaker, it can even tell you that there are Russian expressions that even if you dedicate your whole life to learning Russian, it's still not going to be that easy learning the whole language from one point to the next. Like, if in German only articles and maybe possessives are affected by cases, as far as I know, Russian, you have to consider the endings of nouns, plurality, also the gender of a noun. There's masculine, neuter, and feminine. Some endings are borrowed, and you have to also, because Russian is very expressive, you can put the basically the words in any part of a sentence, and you would basically get more information about the word. Now, what is a grammatical case? You might be wondering, well, a case in general in any grammar is a way to get information about a word by modifying the word itself. So that's a case. A declension, which I made videos about. A declension is the modification itself that you do to the word, and Russian has 6 cases, lots of declensions. This is, again, aside from Hebrew, probably the most difficult grammar that you will ever find in this tier list that I'm doing, which, it is a difficult language, and because you get more information about the word, oftentimes it's impossible to translate some words, or maybe you have to add words in different languages. So, even there's this Russian, I guess you can say, stand-up comedian. Yeah, this guy right here, he was a Russian comedian, sadly passed away in 2017, and he talked about linguistic parts of the language, which can be very difficult to learn. And also, if we go back to the cases again, you can just see how many endings are there. But again, as far as this language goes, probably again the hardest grammar that you can find in this language. So yeah, that's basically about this. Now going back to the tier list itself, I would say that as soon as you get the cases over with, and basically you study the hardest part of the language, then comes the easiest part of the language, which is just basic tenses. I mean, Russian does have perfective, imperfective grammar regarding past tenses, future tenses. Not a lot of subjunctive stuff happening in this language. So again, a very difficult grammar, but the sounds are okay. Russian vocabulary is okay. Also, another funny point, because again, Russian is very expressive as a language. I, as a native speaker, can say this. There's a lot of swear words in Russian that you would be surprised how many modifications these words can have in Russian. So again, learning it, again, you can dedicate your whole life to learning Russian, and it would take you years to actually, become kind of like a native speaker. But overall, there are still expressions that would be impossible to translate to other languages, which is why you would have to find alternatives. So again, overall, it is a pretty difficult language. It is somewhat of a practical language because it's only spoken in Russia for the most part. Maybe some other, maybe the Slavic culture has some Russian speakers in Ukraine, in Belarus, in other countries, basically in Europe somewhere. So overall, I would put Russian in the C tier. This is just my opinion of the language. I don't think it deserves to be in the B tier because it's hard. It's a difficult language. I'm just gonna put it in the C tier, and another language will come also in the C tier later. Spoiler. Okay, just saying. Okay, now we have the Israeli flag, which is obviously Israel, Hebrew spoken in Israel. Again, please do not comment anything about what's happening in Israel. Okay, just saying. Okay, regarding Hebrew as a language, I mean, the phonetics of the language are kind of simple. The grammar. Again, if you're not familiar with the grammar, which is how I'm approaching this tier list, if you know the grammar, this will be by far the hardest language to learn in this tier list, because the language is written and spelled from right to left. You have different letters. There is like a nikud system. Nikud in Hebrew means basically dotting and graphing, right? Then naked means to dot and to graph. In Hebrew, basically what this means, if I can show this on the screen, maybe this website can show some things. You can have the sounds of the a, e, I, o, u, and you have to use dots and lines basically to represent the sound. Here you can see all of the combinations of the letters that you can have in Hebrew, basically, right? So it's like, if we consider the nikud system as a dotting system, imagine if English letters had no vowels and you use dots and lines to represent the sounds of the letters, right? So the language has no vowels. You're just using dots and lines to represent them. So grammatically, if you don't know the grammar at all, this is going to be the most difficult language by far in this tier list. I would say that the easiest part of Hebrew would be like, once you get past the nikud system, once you get past all of this, then it becomes a very simple language, because there's only one past tense, only one present tense, one future tense. Reflexive verbs are not too difficult. Imperative mood, very simple. Overall, the grammar, once you get past the letters in the nikud, which is the hardest part, and it's the hardest grammar because it's the only distinctive and unique language in this tier list, I would say. So again, there's just not much to judge with this language. Also, I forgot to mention this with Russian. There's also, Russian slang, Russian swear words, and also slang is something that will apply to English and Spanish later in the tier list. So, Russian slang, there is some Russian slang out there in the Russian speaking world, but okay, we're already past that. Hebrew slang, I mean, I'm not really sure about Hebrew slang because it's been a while since I actually, spoke it, but I only speak it with my sister, my older sister. Hebrew slang, not really that common. You're not really going to find a lot of words with it. There are some Arabic, loan words, habibi, and hummus and stuff, but these are Arabic words, and I look need to learn Arabic because some sounds are familiar from Hebrew. So overall, sounds are easy. Grammar is the most difficult by far if you don't know anything. Lexicon and slang, again, not that much. So overall, my opinion of Hebrew is the D tier. Even though I'm a native speaker of Hebrew, I'm gonna put it in the D tier because not a lot of people speak it in general in the world. Like maybe there's a few million speakers of Hebrew overall. But yeah, that's my opinion of Hebrew. Anyway, the next language, America. Right, the United States, right? Obviously, the language is English, but English is spoken elsewhere in the world, in Australia, Ireland, Scotland, England, etc. But we're using the flag of USA. Sorry, also that the flags are like this bad. Maybe this tier list is broken or something. I don't know. But anyway, using the flag of the US of A. My opinion of this language of English, being a native speaker and also doing this video in English, it's the most commonly spoken language in the world. But this is going to be a very weird take on the language because again, judging this from the perspective of someone who never learned the language, doesn't know anything about it, this language is very, very weird. Like, here's the thing. Grammatically, it's the easiest. Like, you can take a look at the past tenses, future tenses. There's you can say I have eaten, I will have eaten, I ate, you ate, and all of these phrases that I just said apply to the same subject. So conjugation is extremely limited in English. And again, conjugation is something that every language has. It's just that in English, it's the easiest. Okay, you ate, I ate, he, she ate, I will have done, you will have done, she will have done. So basically, conjugation is almost non-existent in English. So grammatically, it's the easiest, but phonetically, again, judging the sounds in English. Now, again, being a native speaker and someone who again spoke this language in school, in the university, with friends and stuff, approaching this from the perspective of someone who never actually, never actually heard the language, someone who never learned it. This is going to be an extremely difficult language to learn, mainly because of the sounds, okay? I'm just going to give an example here. When I was in middle school, okay, this is by the time that I basically mastered English. This was early 8th grade, back in 2016, I think, maybe 2017, I don't know. No, 2016, it was 2016. And I mastered English, and I was in this English class with a bunch of Mexican friends. And in that class, before the teacher transferred me to a higher English class, there was some Mexican kid in that class who, he spoke fluent Spanish, came from Mexico, but the teacher made him read a passage from it was an English reading class basically, and he was actually struggling a lot to read a passage or a paragraph from a book. And that is because, again, considering that Spanish and English are also, together right here, Mexico and the USA, it's a lot, I know it's going to sound weird that I say this, but it's actually a lot easier for English speakers to learn Spanish than it is for Spanish speakers to learn English. Because while the grammar can be very simple in the language, the sounds, the phonetics, again, the last time that I've actually seen these sounds and started understanding what phonetics are is with French. When I started learning French back in 2025, I started to understand the phonetics of French basically. And the phonetics of French and English equally the most messed up sounds that I've ever seen in any other language. The sounds of English are even worse than Hebrew and Russian, low-key. Not even kidding that I'm saying this. But anywho, the phonetics, the phonology of English. Also, English has multiple dialects in the world. There's again, if I go incognito mode, how many English dialects are there? Linguists estimate that there are over 160 distinct regional dialects of English globally. That's a big number, right? That's a big number. And the reason why I'm bringing this up in this, in this tier list is that when you get to Spanish and you start learning dialectology in Spanish, it's actually way easier than Spanish. Spanish is literally the easiest and most perfect language. But anyway, back to English. So again, grammatically, it's the easiest. There's a lot of slang in English, considering, again, the amount of dialects that exist in this language. You have, Europe, you have Australia, maybe parts of Africa speak it, parts of Asia also speak it. So it's, again, the most spoken language in the world. And you might expect me to put it in the S tier because of how easy it is. But judging this from the perspective of someone who never learned the language, I'm gonna put it in the B tier. B tier, again, in my opinion, is the average. It's an average language. There is an equal amount of hard stuff and easy stuff in the language. And although it may be a weird hot take of English, again, grammatically it's the easiest. but there's a lot of vocabulary, there is a bunch of slang in this language that not a lot of people even know the sounds of English. Like when I studied French phonetics, I realized, oh my god, like why are words not pronounced all the way? There's like liaisons and stuff. There's like contractions too. And in English, same exact thing, right? You think Spanish phonetics are hard? Wait until you study English phonetics, because phonetically, English is like, again, one of the most messy sound-wise languages in the world. So again, just judging off of that factor, again, considering how, again, if you never learned English and you start reading English and actually listening to it, it can be very, very, very difficult because you don't know the sounds. Some words are pronounced differently. Even sometimes I struggle to pronounce like new words, maybe sometimes in video games, but anyway, that's a different story. So that's my take on English. Goes in the beat here. Now we have, as I said, the easiest language, the most perfect language ever made, Spanish. This is not even a joke, no brainer. S tier all the way. This language goes automatically to the S tier. Now again, there are many Spanish dialects in the world. There are many countries that speak Spanish. Over 20 countries, I think, in the world speak Spanish, but I chose Mexico because most of the grammar guides that I have focus on Mexican Spanish, and considering that I learned the language at UNLV, the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, I learned the language for about 4 years. 2 years were 2 years of grammar, and the rest was like, just practical stuff, learning translation, phonetics, phonology, dialectology, all of that stuff. So for the most part, I had Mexican professors who basically studied Spanish in Mexico, then came to the States and teach, for the most part. But anyway, the reason why this language goes into the S tier specifically is because, again, it's a Romance language. It's the first Romance language in the tier list. Romance basically means the language came from Latin, so there's a lot of origins to this language. Phonetics are literally the easiest ever in any other language that you can find. Grammar, I mean, you do have. Here's the thing about the Spanish grammar. If you've spoken English, and this is actually a phenomenon that I saw when I did a research paper at UNLV on people who are monolingual, so only speak one language, basically. For English speakers, especially those that live in the States, in America, if let's say you have an English speaker who, let's say, maybe spoke English for like 30 years, maybe 40 years, only English, like without learning any other language, and they start to learn Spanish, it's actually going to be very difficult for them. But not because Spanish is a hard language, but because they've spoken English for so long that the ability and the cognizance to learn, to basically pick up new details on a new language can be very difficult. So it can be very overwhelming to learn a new language, especially one like Spanish. But for the most part, very easy phonetics, very easy phonology, literally the easiest phonetics that there are, easiest grammar. Maybe the hardest part of the grammar in Spanish is, like the subjunctive. Maybe there was actually a moment where I was struggling to learn the subjunctive. I actually did not even know what the mood was about until some professor at UNLV told me, oh, it's about subjectivity. And I was like, oh, that kind of makes sense. But then a different professor said, no, it's not about subjectivity. It's about like, it's a temporary mood. It's about, it appears in dependent clauses. It's not factual. It's all imaginative. And basically, like, there's actually a Spanish course that I took that fully explained the mood, the subjunctive mood, if you don't know what that is. And I was like, bro, that actually clicks. That actually, perfectly makes sense. Also, a detail that I forgot to say with English regarding the grammar is that English, again, grammatically, it's super easy. It's the easiest grammatically, but there aren't some, compound tenses, perfect tenses, like, past perfect, present perfect, that it can be overwhelming for people, again, who never heard of English, because you have to add auxiliary verbs. You basically you have a subject, then you add a helping verb, and then you add the main verb, which is like a participle. Like, I have eaten, I had eaten. Spanish has the same exact thing. So again, grammatically not too difficult, but overall, the phonetics and the grammar of Spanish is the easiest overall. Again, combining the two concepts. But I will say this, okay? This is what I will say. The lexicon, that is the vocabulary of Spanish, which I need to build the more I speak Spanish, and also the slang. Spanish slang and Spanish lexicon and Spanish dialects are probably the most diverse in this tier, again, aside from English, obviously, right? Spanish vocabulary and Spanish slang is something that I actually don't know myself. I know Spanish grammar and I know Spanish phonetics, but I actually do not know that much of a lexicon. I don't have a lot of vocab. Let me put it this way. I do have a Spanish register, like, like in formal context, like in a casual conversation, I can speak Spanish. But formal Spanish, like, in law, in medicine, in different countries, I actually don't know that because it's not, I'm fluent in the language, yes. But it's like, bro, Spanish vocab, just like English vocab, is something that you have to build. You actually have to, like, speak the language multiple times. You also have to listen and understand, from where speakers are coming from. And also considering that I took a Spanish dialectology course, there's a lot of dialects, but they're looking not that hard. Like, Spanish in Spain is not too difficult. Indian Spanish is not too difficult, but in the Caribbean and Chilean Spanish can be very difficult. So again, overall, lexicon, slang, vocab of Spanish can be difficult, but not the hardest thing in the world to learn, basically. So that's my take on Spanish. Literally, S tier, it's a language that I feel like everyone should learn in the world because it's so easy, bro. But okay, now we have 3 languages left in the tier list. That is German, French, and Italian. These are the languages that I know the least, but I know I can speak them on like a intermediate to advanced level. Starting with the German, which I already know where it's gonna go because I spoke about the cases. And this is something that I said regarding Russian previously in the tier. I would say this: when people say that Russian is difficult, it's actually way more difficult than you think. Whereas German, it's not as hard as you think. Okay, so basically, before I start, judging the grammar, phonetics, and also the lexicon, I'm just gonna put it in the tier that I think it deserves to be in this tier, along with Russian. Okay, I'm gonna put German and Russian in the same tier, C tier. That's basically my opinion of German, because both languages have cases. Both languages can be very hard grammatically. The phonetics of German are actually, pretty simple. It's a very aggressive sounding language, which I actually think it's actually a very, very nice sound to it, in my opinion. But again, I'm not really familiar with lexicon and with vocab. I need to build that up because, again, I need to speak it and listen to more German. But what I wanted to emphasize was this. If I go, again, incognito mode and go German cases articles, both definite and indefinite, and you start looking at these articles, you can see case, nominative, accusative, dative, and genitive. These are the indefinite articles. Then you scroll down, you see the definite articles. Here's the thing regarding German cases as opposed to Russian cases, because Russian cases, you have to memorize endings, and also some endings are borrowed, so there's a whole lot of stuff that you have to understand. But with German, on the other hand, it's not really so much about the it's not really about the articles themselves. It's more about understanding when to use the articles. In my opinion, German is hard, but it's not as hard as people say it is. You have the articles, both definite and indefinite. You also have, if I can look up the possessive pronouns in this language. Again, we're back at the German possessives right here. Meine, deine, seine, ihre, seine, unsere, ihre. Sorry for the mispronunciation. It's just that, again, it's something that you have to build up. But for the most part, it's not really about the endings or the articles. It's more about understanding when to use them. Okay, so once you understand the hardest part of the grammar, which is when to use these things, then the rest of the language becomes easy. So returning to the tier list, the reason why it goes into the C tier is because it is hard grammatically. You have to understand the cases, but it does, it's a Germanic language, just like English, obviously. So the two languages are, kind of similar. The phonetics are not too bad. Lexicon, not really familiar with it, but still, the cases are by far the hardest. But everything else after that, there's the present perfect, past perfect. Everything after that is basically simple and straightforward. But still, in my opinion, it should go into the S tier. Right now, coming at the end of the tier list, we have French and we have Italian. Both languages are Romance languages, and these two languages have something in common that I actually did not even know in the previous languages. Spanish is a Romance language, it's very easy. English is Germanic, but the sounds are hard. Russian and German, cases. And Hebrew, the most distinctive and the most unique language in this tier. But what Italian and French have that I did not even realize until I started to learn the past tenses, okay? And that is they have a compound past tense, which is something that, English and Spanish obviously have a like a present perfect, past perfect, but compound past tense basically means that you have two helping verbs, two auxiliary verbs, and you have to understand when to use each one. And also participles are affected; they can change the ending, especially when you get to like the literary and the remote past tenses that the two languages have. So again, overall, let's start with French for now, making this quick. The phonetics of French, just like I said with English, phonetics, phonology, the most messed up sounds in any language that I've seen. You have to study French phonetics to understand French, because there are like liaisons when you have a word where the letter is not pronounced at the end, or a consonant is not pronounced at the end, and then a new word starts, and then that word begins with a vowel, and then that consonant has to be pronounced with the vowel, and if there is no vowel, then you don't pronounce the consonant. There's also contractions and stuff. I have no idea how you can listen to French, because I have tried listening to French, in movies, in in tutorials, and I was like, how the hell do you listen to French? Because how do you utter 5 syllables, and those 5 syllables are like 10 words in one sentence, because those 5 syllables can mean 1 word or 10 words in one sentence. So again, approaching this from the perspective of someone who never heard of the language, never spoke it, never listened to it, the phonetics and the phonology of French are probably the hardest thing that I've ever seen, even harder than English, I would say. But again, this is just my opinion. But French, being a Romance language, the grammar, again, not too difficult. Conjugation patterns are simple. But again, what French and Italian have in common is, again, the 5 past tenses. There's like a compound past, imperfect past, past perfect, and then 2 literary past tenses that are only basically used in literature. So you don't really have to learn them. But again, regarding the compound past, you have, in French, there is, avoir and être. Avoir means to have, être means to be. And this is actually a very interesting phenomenon that evolved from Latin that English and Spanish don't have. Basically, you can say something like, I have eaten in French, which would be logically translated to I ate. Okay, I have eaten. But you're using the verb eat, which is like it's not a verb of motion, it's just a basic verb. But you can also say, not with to have, but with to be, you can say I am eaten, or I am talked, or I am walked, or something. But it doesn't make sense in English. In French, it makes sense because you have to use the verb to be, être, to basically use specific words, maybe like verbs of motion, verbs of movement with être. Because those verbs, the participles of those verbs make sense to be used. It makes sense to be used with that verb, basically. So you basically split two helping verbs per the category of the verb, which is something that English and Spanish do not do. Okay, maybe Russian has Russian has verbs of motion, which can be perfective and imperfective, but that's a different category of grammar. French and Italian both have this whole compound past. In Italian, you have essere. And what was the other one? Avere and essere. So basically, it's the same exact concept evolved from Latin, where you have 2 helping verbs, and you have to understand which verbs to use. And you have to build your lexicon too, to understand which verbs have to be used, which not. So overall, it goes into the B tier, right here with English. English phonetics and French phonetics are equally messed up, and they're very difficult to learn if you don't know the phonetics of these languages. So anywho, now we have the final language in this tier, Italian. Phonetically super simple, phonologically super simple, up there with Spanish. Here's what I will say about the grammar. Again, considering how there's the subjunctive, also imperative, the 5 past tenses. You also have the avere and essere, which are two helping verbs, 2 auxiliary verbs, where you have to also understand the participles, which verbs are used with this auxiliary verb, which verbs are used with this one. So again, the compound past tense, both in French and Italian, is a level of grammar that I discovered for myself that I did not even know. But once I started, learning, what's the point of splitting the verbs, then I understood, okay, it evolved from Latin. Latin had an influence. All of that makes sense, basically. Putting aside the compound past tense, one element that I struggled with this language, that basically there are ways to combine articles with prepositions and stuff, and I was like, bro, that's a lot of information to learn, okay? And that can be, overwhelming, pretty difficult, but again, it's a Romance language. It's not too difficult to learn. So again, phonetically and phonologically, very simple. Grammar is, again, super simple, aside from the compound past, and also the prepositions with the articles, which I don't know why it does that, but that's basically Italian. Fun fact about Italian, it's the closest language to Latin because it borrows, there's also double consonants, which makes the language kind of funny and beautiful at the same time. I would say it's the most beautifully sound language in this tier. But again, lexicon, slang, vocab, I don't have a lot of knowledge regarding this. So overall, I would put it in the A tier. Okay, I don't think it touches the S tier just yet. I feel like if it wasn't for the compound past and also the contractions with the prepositions and stuff, I would put it in the S tier. But overall, that's my take on these languages. Okay, it's a small tier list of languages. I know I made a pretty long video with these languages, but it's just my opinion of them. I just judge them based on what I think is the easiest and most practical, to the languages where it's like, maybe try doing that at a different time. Now, again, I'm not saying any of these languages are bad. What I'm saying is the languages at the top, they're very simple, judging them based on phonetics, grammar, lexicon, but the languages at the bottom are like, more time is needed with those languages. But okay, being a video that I did with no script and considering that I just, decided to improvise some things on the spot, this is my small tier list of languages regarding the languages that I know. Not a lot of languages in this tier, but this is just my opinion of them, only 7 languages. In the future, maybe I'll do like a different video or like a separate video with other languages. But this is just, this is just my first personal video after the big Spanish video that I did on the channel. Maybe it's gonna be popular, maybe not, I don't know. But this is just my opinion of the languages. And after this video is done, I'm gonna make, a few more personal videos regarding how I learned Spanish at UNLV, also judging some Spanish classes in between, also maybe like how I would relearn Spanish if I could start over. Then in the end, maybe make a video of me talking about like, graduation and stuff, because I recently graduated from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas with a, diploma about world languages and cultures, concentrating in Spanish. So lots of accomplishments are being done, in this small tier list of languages. But yeah, that's really about it for this video. More personal videos will come after this one. So yeah, that's it basically for this video. Thank you for watching. Peace. See you in the next one.